Okay, so this is the second part of you plan to organize your persuasive speech. And I'm going to go over a couple different ways that you can do that. We'll discuss how I would like you to do it, how you're required to do it in your speech for your assignment. So the most obvious one is problem solution. You introduce the problem, where you've done a good examination and analysis of the problem. And with that, you bring statistics, facts, research, testimonies, data, all those supporting materials that show and demonstrate and illustrate that the problem's real and it's really a problem, and how it's affected people or the environment or animals, whatever it is, whatever problem you're actually you're giving a speech on. Visual aids, presentation aids, such as images, videos, graphs, charts. When you're using statistics, we want to see that. All those things are really, really helpful when you're talking about the problem. Like, you can't just talk about it in a conceptual way. We want to actually see it, visually see it, or even hear it, right? Think about the potential of all the different ways people learn. Maybe we need to hear it needs to be auditory. And we want to hear the problem. We want to have the most up-to-date research on the problem, okay? If you're giving us a problem that we already know about, let's say your speech is on global warming, and we know about global warming, what new information are you going to bring to the table that's going to talk about global warming in a way we haven't heard it before? That will show that it hasn't been solved yet, right? It's a new way of thinking about it. Or maybe you're going to talk about the impacts of global warming that we haven't realized yet. Your solution should show that you've thoroughly examined all the possible solutions and you've found this to be the best solution to your problem, okay? That you demonstrate that you've looked at that. You can have more than one solution. The solution has to be realistic. It has to be plausible, right? It has to be something we could actually do. It can't be pie in the sky or something that is unrealistic or impossible or feels impossible. And even if it sounds impossible, if you were to actually give a way of implementing what's your plan for implementing that solution, then maybe that what would seem impossible would seem possible. So that's the burden on you, is to present us, convince us that this will work. It should involve, you should absolutely use creative and analytical thinking. Absolutely. I'm expecting you to do that. I'm expecting you to come up with some of your own original take on the solutions maybe that are in place. Obviously, if those solutions were working, then there wouldn't be a problem anymore. So if you've talked about the problem, those solutions aren't working, how could you tweak those solutions to make them your own, right? To make them original and to make them so they would actually work. So they would solve the problem, so the problem would go away. Always want to include how your audience can be involved in that, right? You're trying to convince them. So what are they going to do to be involved with it? When you make it so the audience is responsible for implementing your solution, not just you, it makes it feel as if we're all in this together, okay? And it's a very persuasive way of talking about something. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this is different ways you can outline your problem solution speech. This is, again, a very common way of approaching a persuasive speech. You can start with your intention getter, which should include your thesis and preview. Then you talk about, in the body of your speech, you talk about the problem. You have the option of doing this instead. You have the option of having your introduction the same way. In the body of your speech, that's when you talk about the problem solution. And then in the conclusion, you reiterate your solution, perhaps. Okay, or another way you can think about it is in your introduction, this is where you introduce a problem. Okay, you talk about how bad the problem is. And then in your body, you address the solution. And then maybe in your conclusion, you advocate for how the audience is going to get involved. So there's various ways that you can approach the problem solution format or outline for doing a persuasive speech. So comparative advantage, another example of what I call persuasive speech, or what is a persuasive speech, comparative advantage, where you actually compare and contrast things that are similar in nature but are different. So that whole saying of comparing apples to oranges, right? At least apples and oranges are fruits. I'm going to give you an example of what can't be a comparative advantage, right? Because you're going to argue that there's an advantage of one over the other, but they have to be in the same body of things, okay? An example that I had a student do is they gave a speech and they tried to compare Burning Man to Coachella. Okay, if you don't know what Burning Man is, look it up, but it's basically a bunch of people go to the desert and they dress up in lots of different costumes and they dance, like do ecstatic dancing basically to, I can't remember the music, but certain kind of music. And there's no bands, okay? It's just people dancing together, and I think it's pretty party and drug fueled, okay? That's what it has, that's the thing it has in common with Coachella. Coachella is a music festival, right? Where bands come and play over so many days, and people may dance, so there's dancing, and they may party a lot, that's the same thing. But the reason for having it, completely different, okay? They're not in the same, comparing one concert to another concert is one thing, but Burning Man's not a concert. It's not that, it's like an experience. Coachella might be an experience as a result of the concert, but they're not the same thing. So if you're going to do a compare and contrast speech, you need to be able to compare and contrast something that's within the same subject matter. So your job is to make sure that we understand what it is about these particular things. You have to show the same and then show how they're different and how their differences, right? It's their differences, one better, more advantageous than the other. Okay, that's what your job is to do in this particular speech. All right, let's move on to Monroe's motivated sequence. This is exactly what you'll be doing your speech on. So Monroe's motivated sequence has 5 steps. This is the order of the steps: attention, need, satisfaction, visualization, and action. These are steps. How you will outline your speech assignment will be through these steps. You can even name them in your outline: attention, and how you're getting the audience attention, need, satisfaction, visualization, and action. Now I'm going to go over these in detail in the next slide so you can kind of. So the attention part is where you're grabbing the audience's attention. You've already talked about the problem in your past speech, informative speech, but the attention and need is where you're going to kind of remind us about that. Attention is just an attention getter. Grab the audience, start with a statistic, a story, something to engage your audience. That's your job on that step. The second step is need. Tell us about the problem. Focus on the most important details about the problem. Don't go in total depth about the problem here. We want to know the basic things about this topic that make it such a bad problem. Then get into the solution. Your solution should satisfy, that's why it's called the solution to your problem that you just presented. It should solve it.